So this year, again, retirement census, and we do this for three main purposes, okay? That is number one, for the operators to actually be able to have some semblance of something from a benchmarking perspective to help look at KPIs, understand what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. You know, if you're rewarding people and they have 95% occupancy, but everyone else has 98% occupancy, we're like, actually, they shouldn't be being rewarded for that. Second thing is to allow us as an industry to be able to have some real hard data to better put our case forward. So a lot of the guys here at Property Council do a lot of work, the RLC, in trying to lobby to help government understand the things that we as an industry are facing. And so the data behind that helps them to be able to do that. And the third thing is really for investors to be able to say, I'm interested in this industry. Can I learn a little bit more about it? What are some of the metrics so I can understand what may or may not be, how it operates, and go from there. So this past year, we actually had 70,000 units of data that everyone gave. So first of all, thank you very much to those that contributed, because every extra bit of data is important, right? And so I think it broke out, we had 56 contributors, around 617 villages, 70,000 units of data. That's more than last year, but it's not a massive jump more. So while that's good, it's kind of like, ooh, are we plateauing? We know, and it was last night, a couple of us were having a conversation, that, well, we actually don't know exactly how many units there are in the industry, but call it somewhere around 200,000. That's a material sample, which is great. Now, not every question is answered for every village, as you'll see as we go through the presentation, but it's a material sample. Of course, we would love for it to be more. We would love to get more. So one of our call-outs is encourage all of you that are here that didn't participate this year, and that might be because you're like, I never have, or it might be because, ooh, Tone, sorry, we forgot to get you our data because we were too busy. Whatever the reason, try and get in it next year. It's really good. It's helpful. Good for you, good for the industry, and everybody's a winner. 4 key things that we had this year from a takeout perspective. First one was that the median DMF percentage actually dropped back a little bit. That's interesting. So last year it was around that 35%. This year it's around 30%. Now remember, this data set is not a longitudinal study on a single set of villages. So yes, there are new villages in the mix. We also do note, we'll see a little further in, that not-for-profit villages, we got a few more of them this year, so sometimes they are a little bit less. I would also say that there is an element of newer villages, in particular some of our nice verticals that are going up, that are higher priced. People go, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to charge a higher DMF because if someone's going to pay me $2 million for a unit, I'm going to keep it in the 20s. It looks a little bit better that way. So there are reasons for it, but nevertheless, interestingly enough, anecdotally, there are also other reasons. People, some organizations have pulled their DMFs back a little bit for whatever reasons, whether that be marketing, whether it be pressure, whatever that might be. That's where we land. Now, kind of countering that is the capital gains change. So overall, from a capital gains share perspective, the proportion of villages with a separate share has fallen from 50, so that's to be clear, a separate share for the resident, has fallen from 55% to 48%. So that could offset it a little bit less on the percentage in the end, and you're not getting your capital gain share. We all know there's 1,000 different ways to cut it, but that is actually an interesting trend to see from an industry perspective. Second, which I think is exciting, is the verticals, right? So verticals really, really have taken off. So they've gone from 30% to 48% of new villages that are starting are either entirely vertical or have a proportion of vertical in them. So when I first started looking at villages in Australia, right, 15 years ago, there were very few vertical villages. And now we're talking about almost half of the new ones that are started are vertical. Really interesting and impactful. And so you look at that as an insight, right? So we have data here, but then you look at that as an insight and you can start to foresee things and understand, well, what impact is that going to have on the builders that we traditionally use? So the ones that would normally do single story, $1,200 a square meter, building something, well, they probably can't do my multi-story. So what's the depth of builders there? So there's lots of questions that as leaders we kind of say, oh, how can this help us think about that? One thing that I think is not good is that, unfortunately, average number of days between vacant possession and sale of the units has blown out a little bit, right? So that's 15 days in addition. Now, this is a little bit of a hobby horse that I have, and everyone here who runs villages will understand, right? The reality is vacant possession date to sale date is it's an easier thing to measure, but a very difficult thing to say when you've got regulation coming in saying, I want you to pay a buyback in a certain period. Well, let's just go down that path. Vacant possession date. You talk to the family, say, okay, what are we going to do here? Hang on, we are bereaved. We're grieving for 2 months or 4 months or however long that might be. You then talk to the family, and they will say, okay, well, your mom's been in there for 30 years, so we should refurb this unit. Oh, I don't have the money to do that. Well, this is how it works. This is how we'll pay for it for you. We'll help. It'll come out of the... That discussion could take 6 weeks, 2 months, easily. Then you finally get agreement with it, and you say, all right, let's get the guys in, let's get builders in, and let's do it. By the time that unit is actually on sale, like when you push the button and say, it's now for sale, that could be longer than 6 months. So if we're staring down the barrel of regulation that says you got to buy it back within 6 months, I think that's unfair. So it's just interesting to look at more days that are out, and so that's a reality. We know that there are some pockets where people are going to the clapper, they're going really well, and there's some pockets that are a little bit less. Buybacks. So talking about buybacks, not surprisingly, there's an increasing proportion of villages that are offering buybacks. Now, I've done a little toggle switch, the new chart this year, where we can look at where they lie, and we'll get into that later. But the reality is it was around 65% last year. We're at 71% this year. Now, some of those numbers are going to be a little bit hard to see in the way back. There are some copies on the table. If you really want to get into the numbers, I would encourage you to just keep your eyes on the flat-headed American on the stage. But I'm just going to talk through them, okay? So a few different trends that are out there. Occupancy. Occupancy is stable. So 89% is the figure that we're looking at across all of Australia. It differs by state there, so this is top left chart. So 89%. I've run retirement villages in a couple different countries, and I've seen overall market occupancy rates be as low as 83%. I've seen them be as high as kind of 95%. Anything above that, you got frictional kind of vacancies, and it's hard to measure above that. So 89 is not great. We have been on this census in the low 90s a couple years ago, but it's not disastrous either, right? Next thing, average village size. That's kind of stayed the same. When we look at average village size, it's been around 100 to 120. When you take into account there are a lot of smaller ones, particularly the not-for-profits might have a 10 or a 27 units versus our 200, and some of you guys have 600 units, but on balance they go there. I think a more interesting measure to look at here, again, we don't have all the data, so this is hey, we'd like to ask you more questions, but you do also have question fatigue, would be the density of these villages, right? So, okay, they might be 100, they might be 100, Ian, you built your one down there in Fisher Street, 140 units, but guess what? It's on 1.4 hectares of land, right? Not 10 hectares of land. So I actually think that there is something in us as an industry measuring the density of retirement villages and how they're increasing, and things like, is that contributing to, smaller footprints that mean we don't have to have infrastructure going further out? Is it contributing to, from a climate perspective, carbon, right? There's lots of different threads that you can take with a base data set like that. Villages by type, we spoke about that before. There's a lot more verticals that are happening. And then aged care. So a few more. Last year, that across Australia statistic was 27%. We're at 29 this year. So a little bit more aged care co-location. We heard from Lynn earlier this morning. There's a lot of value in kind of continuum of care, and okay, we might have villages that don't offer that, but with that co-location of aged care, we can try and offer that. But again, it's funny, you can say phrases like that, and then you can sit there and go, let's look at the reality. And in my experience, anecdotally, I know that I had villages next to aged care centers, and they had like 10% of people from my village, right? The fact of the matter is, aged care facilities oftentimes fill up not necessarily from the people from the village that they're right next to. But it is something that people do tend to value, and as a consumer, you put your hat on, and we all think that we're going to beat the life tables, and mom and dad are going to need it, but life tables are real for a reason, and we all don't make it in there, right?